りおしまい。
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
and your host on the right, Brock,
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. On this episode, we're talking about Dragon Ball as usual, and in particular, episode 124, Temple Above the Clouds. What is it in the Japanese, do you know?
The Temple Above the Clouds.
Oh, wow. Not much of a difference.
This one is one of the only ones we've seen where it's just the same.
Yeah. That's good. That means probably the spirit aligns, as we're going to see. I actually listened back to this episode in English before you got here as well because I wanted to kind of test it. It's not too bad. Anyways, that's the one we're going to cover. But before we get started, if you like what you hear, please give us a like. Subscribe to our channel. We upload new episodes to YouTube Mondays and Thursdays and to Rumble Tuesdays and Fridays. We also have been doing some Soulsborne content. We're going to try and continue to do that as we continue to go. Anything else to add, Brock?
No.
Well, without further ado, this is 124 Temple Above the Clouds. So Goku races back into Korin's lookout with the Noibo clutched in his hands. Korin instructs him to climb onto the roof with it and shows him a small hole in the top of the structure meant to hold the Noibo. He tells Goku that if he inserts the Noibo and holds on tightly, he'll be taken all the way to Kami's temple. After giving Goku a small bell to show his approval, Korin tells him to try not to freak out when he meets Kami. Goku then zips into the sky propelled by the extending Noibo. Meanwhile, back at Kame House, Launch finishes up bandaging Tien, only to be teased by Oolong for putting love into her treatment. She chases him around the house, but they're interrupted by a news report on TV, showing that Goku has been identified as the savior of the world. Just then, countless news reporters arrive to interview Goku. Jealous of the attention that Goku is receiving, Oolong decides to transform and imitates him, asking a female reporter for a kiss. Bulma and Yamcha smash him over the head, revealing him to be the pig that he is. His nose changes into the pig nose and everything.
Right.
So let's go back, start at the beginning, because we got to talk about that. So this has always been a part of the design of Korin's tower. Ever since we first saw it, right?
Right.
We even see it from a wide shot there, and we see the little thing on top. We don't know what it is, but I just want to mention that it's been there. Now, Yajirobe also doesn't. Is it that he doesn't believe it? think that's so, right?
Right. Yajirobe generally is in disbelief that the Noibo would be able to actually take him to an entirely different place that,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, the Nimbus could take him.
Right, exactly. And so, um, Korin tells him that this will take him all the way to Kami's Lookout. Now, this is significant because this is the connection of the earthly and the heavenly through the idea of the ancestral heritage, let's say. And so here we see this heirloom that Goku's had since the very first episode, right? That everyone is technically born with, let's say, because this is about the self. So everyone has that connection to their ancestry, right? And that's ultimately what Goku has to go back to in order to then ascend past the earthly, what do I want to say, domain, to ascend into a heavenly realm.
Yeah, it's sort of to gather up the all of the relevant information of all of your ancestors going all the way back in time and putting that together into one common spirit
Well, it's not
and
so
finding the center there.
right. It's not so much it is about the pattern, right? The pattern of
Yeah.
being that propels those, uh let's say the pattern of being that further integrates. Following that path is infinitely beneficial,
Right.
and that's why the Noibo can reach infinitely. And so, well, as we've seen, like it reaches to the moon, whatever. But here, right, it takes Goku to the heavenly realm because that's what ascends someone past that, is following those patterns by that connection of the ancestry. Yeah.
And specifically, it is a personalized Axis Mundi that everybody carries with themselves that connects our world and the world of the heavens.
Right,
It
the
is
suffering, you're bearing the suffering of the ancestry, right, your ancestry,
right.
by having the
I mean,
weight of
that's the
this.
reason that nobody else ever uses the Noibo except for Goku. Like, why doesn't anyone else actually use it? I mean, Tien got it. Logically speaking, Tien would be like, "Oh, this is an amazing thing." In fact, Yamcha knows what it is whenever he sees it. He knows that it's a valuable weapon to
I
try
mean,
to
at that
use,
point though, Yamcha subconsciously knows that he wouldn't be able
and
to
that's the
wield it.
point, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have the reverence necessary to use it in the first place. No, I want to rephrase that. It's not use it, to find it useful. I think that's the proper term for it.
Right.
Because Goku finds it useful as a weapon in the beginning of the show in order to set things in order from chaos, like the dragon he rescues Bulma from.
Right. And
But then
also
he
uses
finds
it
it
to save people from
right.
sort of.
He finds it useful to save people. I think that's the way to say it, because he also then finds it useful to connect himself with the heavenly.
Right. And we see that it's represented in him bringing it sort of home to where it belongs.
Yes.
Which
This is
is to
something
say
that
that,
Roshi took.
yeah. But that if there was a perfect place for it to go where it actually belonged, it belongs at a point that supersedes you. It's not just yours. Your thing fits into a higher pattern, right? And this is where it fits into a cosmic pattern.
Yes, and we need to. I don't know if we addressed it last episode or this episode, but Roshi took this, right, and he gave it to
Right.
Grandpa Gohan, and then Grandpa Gohan gave it to Goku. Roshi taking this, right? It's that the spiritual father, um, removing that connection of the world intentionally. Remember what Roshi has gone through at that point. This is a point where Piccolo has already descended on the earth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so his seeking of that, right, and the trying to use that is ultimately something that is not like you shouldn't. I don't think people should look down on Roshi for taking it, is what I'm getting at.
No. Well, that's the thing because a lot of that's explained by Roshi's blindness in general. And we understand his blindness as we understand Piccolo, but we can look at what he's done through the lens of his generalized blindness and see that there's a redemptive nature of what he's done anyway, right? That even though he's done what he's done for blind reasons, it still is in service of a bigger, more noble cosmic picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that his ultimate subordination to these ideas still keeps him towards doing something good, even if his generalized human reasoning is not necessarily just for
True,
the sake of good.
true, but his taking of it is really that blindness manifest, because then he can't be the hero anymore.
Hmm.
That path that's really where it's decided, right? And so Goku finds the Noibo useful to connect himself with the heavens, where Roshi found it useful to remove that connection in those times, especially because, I mean, when we figure out later on about Kami, let's say.
Right. And so there's two other things about this. This episode's packed.
Yeah.
He gives him the bell for
Yep.
a symbol of his recognition, right? Which is, we could liken it to Dark Souls with the bells of awakening, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the bell of awakening because Goku's about to ascend past the physical realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this bell is very important symbolically because it ties into that what bells typically symbolically mean, right?
Well, and it see, I want to say it's even. I don't think he's leaving the physical realm. I think he's already done that just by fighting Piccolo, because where he's going is a heavenly place.
Yes.
But we'll get there. But yeah, the bell, definitely a bell of awakening, and we'll see how that works in just a second.
And then also telling him not to freak out, which is
It's some good foreshadowing, which
it,
isn't supposed to happen if the author doesn't know what they're doing.
it's like that. I'd like to say, be not afraid, right? Sort of. Who knows what to expect if they saw the face of God, right?
Right.
Totally freak out.
Well, and that's something like Korin. Korin does have that streak though of practicality. Like he's less of it in the way that Roshi is, but he will like play tricks on people, like Yajirobe in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an edge of truth every time that happens, right? And that's intentional. But him telling Goku this is exactly one of those instances. It is true. Don't freak out when you see him, but also he's joking because he knows what he looks like already.
Right.
And it's presumed that Korin at one time went up to Kami's temple,
Right.
which is very interesting to think about as well.
Right. He calls himself his assistant or his attendant as well. So.
Yep. And it's all part of this hierarchical structure that we see at the base of it, the bottom where that first kind of crisis of suffering is experienced by Goku.
Right.
So it's ascended from there, and we've talked about that, but we'll continue. So Goku then goes up into the sky, and he goes so far that they can't see him anymore, and then we get a cutaway to Kame House. Now, some of these cutaways are more useful than others. I think this one is a little more useful.
Yeah.
Which is why another reason why this episode is so packed. So the first thing we see is Launch, blonde, nurturing. What could this mean? This is actually a pretty big deal.
This is more integrated than I think we've seen Launch/Lunch since ever, really, because of what Tien represents. Where Tien he is almost a heavenly being. He is enlightened. He has his third eye. He's oriented towards a noble path. He has,
especially now, yeah. And I wanna mention this. In the same way that in the very beginning, Bulma Bulma awoke things in Yamcha that improved his character and made him more integrated. It's also reciprocal because now we see Tien doing the same thing with Launch, and she's integrating the parts of Blue Launch that she could not previously integrate.
I think that's right. You know, there's there is this reciprocal redemptive pattern in people coming to play roles in Kame House, right? And so right now there is no Master Roshi, right? So where you had sort of Roshi and his blindness, and then you have Blue Launch and her sort of unconsciousness. Now in this household, this little cosmic household, we've got Tien who's got hyper sight. He's got his third eye instead of being blind. And you've got Blonde Launch who is now becoming nurturing towards him, which is sort of like by the opposite means that it happened with Roshi, which was, it was an unconscious. This is a hyper conscious thing.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And it's mirrored really well too, because the way that Bulma and Yamcha interact at this point, right? And then we also get that subconscious part of Bulma in Oolong that mocks Launch and teased her for putting love into the treatment, right?
Right. Sort of embarrasses her because and calls out that she's blushing whenever he says, "Oh, it looks like your treatment came with love." And so in typical fashion, then she runs him down for pointing out the really just coming between them is what it comes down to, because this it's an interesting moment for Launch and Tien where they're both like exactly on the same page, and then Oolong, because Bulma's always like this unrequited figure all the way up through Z, right? Like she can't be accepting ultimately of the of the way that Yamcha is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's I think that is a smallness in her character that's manifest as Oolong, who would try to make a joke out of it, right?
And even still, we'll see how the love blossoming later on in this saga or in this arc, how
Right.
Bulma reacts to that. I mean, Oolong, Bulma, Blong, how
Blue
Blong
long.
relax reacts to it. Um, and so they're interrupted. The chase is interrupted by that news report, which is talking about Goku. And the paparazzi have found out that Goku had once stayed at Kame House, so they're all over Kame House somehow. But this is almost played of more as a gag because they never come back. But they do come, and that's when Oolong again is seeking the attention, which again we can see a smallness in Bulma's character from that.
Yeah, there's and we saw this. We talked about this a little bit before. Whenever Bulma couldn't deal with Yamcha having other women, other
Mm-hmm.
girls be obsessed with him, right?
Yep.
And there is this funny thing about how Oolong acts, where his interpretation is the exact opposite of Goku's. Goku has not responded to anybody who wanted to give him attention because he's completely focused on the right thing. And Oolong is focused on the exact opposite, is only paying attention to sort of the ego building, self-serving aspect of the thing, right? Which is sort of where Tien came from. See, Tien's past that now, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can, if you remember, whenever he first started out, he really wanted to serve his own name and wanted to uh, manipulate his position as a hero, right?
Yeah, and I mean
But
he
now,
wanted to his reasoning to his master for wanting to kill Goku in the ring was so that everyone would see him do it. Like
right?
that aspect of it, right?
But now he's gone beyond that, and that's not something that Oolong necessarily would understand, right? Or Bulma would necessarily understand because of how she's just not on that level, right? And so that's comes up as Oolong's teasing, but it also comes up in Oolong's acting out of being so self-serving about being in a heroic position. And he says that Goku's just so lucky, right? He doesn't understand the self-sacrifice necessary to even be revered in that sense. Because you basically, to be a legend like Goku, there's a necessary death. So he's jealous of a spirit that's so self-sacrificing that he couldn't even stand up to
Well,
it
not
because he
only
never sacrificed
sacrificing
himself.
but courageous.
Right.
Well, because and when we see Oolong make his wish, it's not a self-sacrificing thing.
No.
It is courageous, but that's why he's foolish. He's the foolish hero in that beginning. But anyways, not to retread ourselves too much. So yeah, Goku's so lucky he wants to get a kiss from one of the female reporters. And then Yamcha and Bulma smash him over the head, and I think it's significant that they both do it. Um, it's kind of Bulma has come a long way. I don't want to get down on her because Oolong is kind of sequestered here in Kame House, right? He didn't go with them like he did with the Red Ribbon uh, arc, and her and Yamcha are able to kind of unite and kind of quash that. And it shows that Yamcha has some potential in helping redeem her character.
Yeah, and I mean, in the background, as Oolong is being chased around, Bulma and Yamcha are just playing a game of chess. And then when this happens, they both swing the mallet together and smack him down. And it shows that I think it really is a good representation of what Bulma and Yamcha ultimately are here towards the end of the series, which is they're the human element, right? As they always have been. It starts out with Bulma sort of being the protagonist for the first 13 episodes or so, right? And then it gets handed
Dang,
off.
is it only 13? We've already done 10 times that. Go
I
ahead.
know.
It's
It's
wild.
crazy.
Blowing my mind.
But it originally starts out that way because it's sort of that's your gateway into the story as a human, right? And I don't think they're supposed to treat themselves so seriously that they could be on the level of fighting, Piccolo or something like that. So to have the smallness of spirit manifest and be under control is a very noble thing. It's not something to be down on like Bulma for, right? Because I think she's represented well to be a normal human, a normal person in this world, because everyone that goes beyond that, everything that's spiritual sort of steps into the realm of animalistic or alien, right? It goes beyond the uniquely human thing.
Well, I mean, she is archetype. She's more. Her and Yamcha are more of a combined experience of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, goodness, I'm sorry, it's just really hurting. Um, because she is the archetypal female, or the female archetype which redeems. Like that's what we mean. Like here, Tien we could also say is the male archetype which redeems the feminine spirit, right? Or which rejuvenates the feminine spirit. It's not to say like, oh, Bulma's just a woman. It's just that aspect of it is what rejuvenates that spirit. It's what that spirit needs to be repaired, healed, or improved.
Yeah, I mean that's why there's an imbalance in the representation there between both Bulma and Oolong and Yamcha and Puar, right? That
Yes.
it's a cyclical sort of
It's also significant too that Tien is able to grow closer to launch when Chaozu is not there.
yeah. Well, that's with Chaozu being a manifestation of the thing that I think we've accurately identified was missing from Tien, which is sort of his unintegrated childhood or sort of a missing childhood with the way that he was trained, right? He didn't have that ability to integrate his carefree nature. And so Chaozu being a child, then being lost in this encounter, of course, the archetypal like mother type person in this situation would come to him because his childhood has been killed. Right? This is
Thought it
sort
was
of
just because
his.
he's strong.
It's the process of Tien's becoming like a man in this story, right?
Well,
Killing the boy.
he's becoming a master. He is going past that and becoming a more mature being, and we'll see how that manifests later on. I think that's it for this. Okay, finally we can move on after two mess ups, basically. All right, so high above Korin's tower, Goku approaches a wall of black clouds. As he begins to pass through them, he is struck by lightning, causing him to fall repeatedly before catching the Noibo and climbing back up to the top. Meanwhile, in the wilderness, Piccolo Jr. wanders alone at night. He stumbles upon a home where a young boy is celebrating his birthday party. His parents give him a toy plane as a present, and Piccolo Jr. angrily smashes their window with a rock. When the father runs out to find the disturbance, Piccolo Jr. sneaks inside and wreaks havoc, ruining the celebration and smashing the toy before running out into the night. The family dog chases after him and nearly pounces on him when he trips, but he releases an energy blast from his hands, sending the dog flying. Piccolo Jr. stares down at his hands in disbelief. Okay, so there's a couple parts here. Goku's journey through the black clouds.
So this is very similar to approaching Baba's, right? Where whenever he arrived at Baba's, I think he was flying on the Nimbus,
They
and
were
then
in the plane.
or no, they
Was
were in
he
the
on the
plane.
Nimbus too? He might have been on the Nimbus as well.
I can't remember. Didn't he fly in on the Nimbus? I can't even remember at this time period. Might
It's
have
a
been
lot
after
to
the Nimbus
remember.
got destroyed. By the way, when they were coming in, they had to pass through this like nexus of lightning storms that were very similar to this. And I think this is that same idea, but now on a more transcendental level. This is the reason that, say, the Noibo couldn't get him here, because if he flew the Noibo up to here, it couldn't pass through these dark clouds, right? Which is sort of the enlightenment, with it being lightning, right? Striking him and making him essentially, while being enlightened and shocked, he has to hang on to the pole. I think it's just sort of like the opposite of the Nimbus. This is the temptation to I wouldn't say temptation necessarily, but the process of becoming a higher level being than just the physical instantiation that he was is such that uh, that it would test his physical body to be able to hold together, or would test him to hold himself together as a single being going into the realm of ideas, let's say.
See, I think it's more that he his temptation to, let's say, let go of his connection to the ancestral spirit is being offered to him here, right? Like, just let go, just fall back down, because it is consistently striking him. It obviously hurts him, it shocks him, but it also shows kind of, it shows his determination to not let go of the spirit which got him here in the first place.
And we also see that he's the last time he goes up, he's grabbing it with his tail and
Yes.
catching himself that way.
And it's all, yeah, that's actually significant as well, because then that shows that it's only um it's such a tribulation for him that his conscious self, his waking mind is not able to alone keep grasp of it, let's say.
And as we get into what's at the top of this, then it'll become more clear why that's necessarily true, right?
Yes.
And it's similar also to a point whenever he was originally climbing Korn's tower and then fell and caught himself by his tail in the
Mhm.
same position, right?
Mhm. Mhm. And so he makes it up there. I don't know if, I mean, that's in the clips. I don't know if that was in this, but then we get a shot of Ma Junior in the wilderness, and this is when he decides to be anti-being, let's say, because he sees joy. He sees, let's say, a moralizing force, which I want to say Toriyama is pretty. He does a really good job here realizing that the a moralizing force is this traditional family unit that finds joy just in themselves, right?
Well, specifically, also, there are a couple of parents here celebrating the birth of this child, and that's not something that Piccolo Jr. has,
It
right?
also
He's
seems it's their only child.
right. But Piccolo Jr. is this orphan that was born of destruction and does not have something like this. And we see that it seems like the that lack is something that angers him and makes him want to destroy it, right?
And it's also significant that he goes in and he destroys the toy. He doesn't steal it.
Right, he breaks it.
It's not that he wants the toy, it's that he wants there to be no joy.
Because that's what he's born into.
Yeah, it's kind of him coming to terms with his own nature, which is really interesting because it's cut juxtaposed with this, which is Goku holding on to his own pattern of being.
Right.
And his nature is that reveres the spiritual father and attempts to redeem it. And that's why he's able to keep such a firm grasp on the Noibo.
Right, and it's the inverse of what we're seeing with Piccolo Jr., where he's debasing that process, debasing the celebration of like, um, I don't want to say just the father, but the process of passing life on generationally. There's a
Yeah, it's
celebration that
almost
he sees
a
there.
human, the human spirit.
Right.
the Holy Spirit, which I never understood when I was a kid.
But also the toy is a plane, right?
Yeah.
While Goku's here soaring up to the top of the world, then there's like a toy that's the kid can emulate flying at least. And that also is symbolic of
A
what
moralizing
Piccolo
force,
Jr. would
right?
want to destroy, right?
Exactly. It's well done that it's a plane. Like every little detail about this scene is pretty brilliant.
And he's holding a rock in his hand and does it. Like he could do it any other way, but specifically it's Earth, right, in his
Yes.
hand.
And he also blasts away the dog that chases him right here, right?
This is, I think, really the point of showing this is just that he's coming into the understanding that he is a transcendental being, that like the beasts of the wilderness would not be able to challenge him, and that he doesn't have to have like a, even though he's wandering in the woods,
I
he's
like how
already
you
got
say that.
dominion over
It
it.
kind of it kind of reminds me of the Book of Revelations. Whenever the beast comes out, and he's the beast, and he's the king of all the beasts on the land and all the men, right? And he has 7 crowns on his head. It's like,
Right.
yeah, it's one of that. It is. It reminded me of that whenever you were saying it, but yeah, it really shows that he is that spawn. The seed of evil is still alive.
Right.
And I actually really like the cuts back to it because it makes Piccolo Jr. and it makes sense why Piccolo Jr. goes on to be who he goes to be. And so that all happens, and he stares down in his hands in disbelief because even though he is the seed of evil, like he is still a newborn thing. Like he doesn't know what he's capable of. And being such an instantiation, the destruction inherent is quite shocking.
Yeah, there's this interesting thing where time is kind of, it gets weird here. As soon as Goku breaks these clouds, especially, the way that time seems to flow in this series is going to become a bit distorted.
A little convoluted, if you would. It's almost as if spirits aren't constrained by time. Which is why,
Yeah.
Souls has time that's convoluted. It's not because of, well, go ahead.
But specifically, I think that this like celebration of the passage of 1 year for a child, right, happening at the same time that we're sort of passing into a superordinate passage of time.
Well, why isn't, if let me be a reductionist, why isn't that just one more trip around the sun and it doesn't mean anything?
Why isn't it just an arbitrary trip around the sun?
Mm-hmm. Why are
because
birthdays significant?
phenomenologically it represents a pattern by which you can mark
A pattern?
Yes, you can mark your progress in the world.
And there's a superseding spirit of birthdays, is what you're saying?
Right, they're universal. I mean,
Right. It's part of the human.
it is part of the
condition.
human experience,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
But
I just wanted to.
But I'll say now that it's not the same for Piccolo Jr., right?
I just wanted to play Bloathead's advocate.
Sure.
So yeah, it's not the same for Pickle Jr. When Goku, though, finally breaks through those dark clouds, he finally approaches, and I think
that's what that clip
I
was
just
supposed
think
to go
that
with.
clip was not in the right spot. Finally approaches a giant floating temple in the sky, where the Noibo locks into place. After climbing a ladder to the top, Goku finds himself in a large courtyard with gardens and a small temple. As he approaches, he finds a genie calmly feeding birds. When Goku asks him if he's Kami, the genie tells him that he is Mr. Popo, Kami's assistant. Genie! Wow. I was just thinking of glasses wearing Genie Mr. Popo. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I cannot help it. It's the best. Goku asks to see Kami, but Mr. Popo asks first to see Korin's symbol of approval. Upon receiving the bell, Mr. Popo tells Goku that he is qualified to take the test. He will have to defeat Mr. Popo in a fight. That's it.
Yes.
So, Goku breaking through the dark clouds is significant because it really, the story is kind of transcended into this heavenly realm now. And by heavenly, I mean it is a realm which is more integrated than reality seems to be integrated.
Yes.
insofar as the harmonious strings of the universe, let's say. This is and you can even see here, like, there's a garden, and it's basically a walled garden.
It's a walled garden at the top of the world. The whole thing looks like a dragon radar, where it's a circle with
Oh
the
my gosh,
grid.
there's just so much about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, it is a floating map of the world on top of the world, which is a walled garden where everything is harmonious. And we see that with Mr. Popo here, which we see that he's a genie. We can expand more on the fact that he's a genie as we get into the next part. But the genie specifically is here in harmony with the birds, right? He's feeding the birds, and even when Goku runs up, the birds don't run away, which is interesting, right? Because you would generally, if you ran towards birds, you would expect them to have any sort of reaction, but their being around Mr. Popo seems to be keeping them calm.
Yeah.
Our level still on?
Yeah, go ahead.
And so one thing is that he basically he tells him that he knows about his fight with Piccolo, and he thought that it was impressive, and tells him that Kami knows everything. So immediately this being knows everything that Goku would need to tell him. Similar to Korin, right?
But further, because Korin didn't know that Shenron was dead.
Right.
So it's even a further expansion. But go ahead.
So we do see another assistant to Kami who knows things in the same way that it seems that Korin does, but even more. And is specifically this character's appearance is he's just completely solid black, like just like pitch black, right? So that he's just like eyes and a mouth. And I think part of the reason is that he's the opposite of Korin, who's the white cat at the other end of this pole, right? And so there are two assistants to Kami. Now we know one is solid black and one is solid white.
Well, and let's think too, mythologically, right? Cats have, and especially white cats, have been seen to be lucky, whereas Jin, you can see that as a lucky sign as well, because Jin, when constrained and when, let's say, contained in a walled garden, can be very useful.
Sure.
They can be very they can be in line with the way intended in the universe. But go ahead.
And contending with him specifically is how Goku's trying to bring wishes back to the world, right?
Yes.
And so he is playing the role of a genie in a bottle for him here.
Mhm.
But in order for Goku to be able to commune with the Jinn, there are specific things, right? So I guess this is kind of as good a time as we could to talk about him being a genie, specifically because from here on out it's going to be just Goku's trying to grapple with him. One thing that I think is interesting about Jin is, one, they're neither evil nor good, right? They're a higher order spirit, but they have their own personage, right? So they're not just like, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, he's an angel, right? Because you can interpret an angel to be just good, right? But more of, you could think of if an angel and a demon were the same race, and they could be on a spectrum of good to evil. That's kind of what a Jin is, or a Deva. I think he's actually more along the lines of a Deva for several reasons. But
we'll go on.
So the Deva it's in Buddhism, it's a celestial being, right? He shares godlike characteristics of being more powerful, longer lived, and in general much happier than humans. And although the same level of veneration is not paid to them as Buddhas, right? So they're considered to be ancient. They were created before humans were, and I think I was looking in the Dragon Ball wiki. It says that Mr. Popo was born in Otherworld, right, sometime long ago. Devas are interesting. It says that they're invisible to the human eye, and the presence of a Deva can be detected by humans who have opened their divine eye, or their third eye, right? They're basically considered to be tutelary guardians of temples, which is exactly what Mr. Popo is doing right here, where he's a tutelary defender of Kami's temple. They're also capable of moving great distances speedily and of flying through the air, although lower devas sometimes accomplish it through magical aids, such as a flying chariot, or in the case of Mr. Popo, he's got a magic
sure.
carpet.
Yeah.
So a deva is a more Buddhist interpretation of what a genie is. And I think it's more accurate for Mr. Popo to be one of those.
Sure, yeah.
Because of what he represents for Goku. I kind of think of devas like Adam pre-fall as a race, that walks with God. And we see here that that's what Mr. Popo is able to do here is he's at the same level as Kami, and he's with him, and he's in the garden with him, right?
Well, he's not at the same level as Kami, but yeah, he
not
is
on the
able
level,
to
but,
exist in the same plane.
In
for
that
sure.
garden, right?
Yeah.
And so this is sort of a he's almost returned to the pre-cosmogonic world to exist in stasis with
he's in a
creation
heavenly
itself.
realm. And see, and that's the thing, I hadn't taken that into account because I wasn't versed in that, but it really still goes along because Jinn, you're right, aren't good or evil, but they do take on that impression, right, of the world. They're Jinn that are evil because they're out for revenge and things like that, because of slights that have happened to them, things like that. And so we see that this is like Kami's Jinn. This is how I was interpreting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he is the way, like he's the serene and lawful and orderly spirit that he is, because that is what Kami is able to manifest out of his own pattern of being, and we'll see why that is later on.
Right. A couple of other connections you can make to Kami also, which I just found interesting to help understand what we're about to see, is that Deva is also tied to daemon or daimon, which is the Greek idea, which we all know about.
Yeah.
Socrates and the idea of having the daemon. I think this is part of why Popo is this solid black the way that he is because the daemon told him specifically not what to do, but what not to do. Mm-hmm. Right? He had a voice, and the daemon is considered to be similar to the deva in the sense that it's a higher order pattern that can commune with you and tell you, and basically by listening to it, you can glean wisdom, right?
Right.
They were seen as souls of men of the golden age, acting as tutelary deities. Which, again, a tutelary deity is like is very similar to the deva, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another interesting connection is the Shadim in Jewish mythology, which is essentially a higher order spirit, but that was considered to be evil, not because of their deeds, but because they were a higher order spirit that wasn't God, right? So there's this sort of idea of as being dangerous because they're in that interstitiary space.
Well, yeah,
right?
It's dangerous. They're in such a dangerous space because the way it manifests itself is that they can be used
as false idols, right?
Yeah, they can be used for good or evil, right? I mean, Solomon in the mythology built the Temple of Solomon using Jinn.
Right.
And so you can see that in a way that it is holy or unholy. And it's kind of the way they're used, which dictates the character of the Jinn, which is interesting. Have you read the 1001 Nights?
No, I haven't read it. I've read little excerpts.
So like in Aladdin, for example, there are different Jinn, and like the Jinn that, and usually they come out of, there's some that come out of lamps, but some come out of rings as well. Like the first one Aladdin finds comes out of a ring, and he is pretty chill, pretty benevolent compared to the Jinn that the vizier has that came, and he's like the Jafar character.
Yeah, that was the main reason that I was trying to pull also information of devas rather than genies, just because, man, if you look at just Jinn and genies, there's a million different representations.
Oh, there's so many of them. Yeah, I know.
And they vary from everything to.
But I think that's important because that shows that Popo is the divine being because he is, out of all the Jinn that could possibly be, is the best.
He's held up as the best spirit,
which is what I was going to get
to. Best superordinate spirit.
Exactly. Yeah. So even though like I didn't do, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the Buddhist bent of it because they have a representation of him and it says explicitly not only that, they don't require the same kind of sustenance as humans do.
Mm-hmm.
Lower kinds can eat and drink, but the higher orders shine with their own intrinsic luminosity, right? So there's all of these specific ways that they're described that really stood out to me. It says their voices can also be heard by those who have cultivated divyasrotra, which I know I'm saying that wrong. A power similar to that of the ear, so it's like higher hearing, right? Which we're about to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
Higher movement, higher seeing, higher hearing. All of that is what we're approaching now with Mr. Popo.
With the test.
The test.
Is that did we just talk through that all? I think we did. Corn symbol of approval. We're already really talked about that. So yeah, we can just get into the fight. So sure of himself, Goku rushes in to defeat the genie. Mr. Popo, however, easily avoids Goku's attacks, taunting him in the process. Goku becomes angry and scares the birds away, and Mr. Popo tells him that he will not be able to win with his thirst for blood. Goku is once again parried, and he attempts to use the Kamehameha wave, which is swallowed by Mr. Popo. Becoming desperate, he attempts to use his new monkey fist technique to no avail. A shadowy figure watches on a crystal ball as Mr. Popo tells Goku that he should just go home. And so here we can see that the first thing we see in the fight is Goku does hold it together for a minute. And it's kind of that spark of divinity that Goku still has, because he doesn't scare away the birds instantly. He only does that once he realizes that he's not easily able to win, which is already...
And when he's taunted.
Which is already showing some cracks where Goku might need to work on those things, eh?
Well, that's it. I mean, whenever Goku's taunted and he considers himself, that's when the birds are scared away. It's when Goku becomes self-aware. And the more self-aware Goku becomes, the less he's going to be able to fight Mr. Popo. Because Mr. Popo, being negative, being blacked out in that sense, is emptiness. He is the methodology by which Kami-sama has accomplished what he has, which I don't want to get ahead of our analysis. But because he's emptiness, the more Goku puts himself in the fight, the less he can fight him. Because Mr. Popo has no self to get in the way.
Right. He's devoid of that. He's devoid of all of that. And yeah, I like that analysis of saying that Goku, the more self-aware he is, the less he can operate on this plane of being, which makes sense. And so then Mr. Popo tells him that he'll not be able to win with his thirst for blood. Go ahead.
And that's I just love it. It's such a good analysis, or our analysis is such a good analogy because so then Goku says, well, then I'll use the Kamehameha on you, right?
Yeah.
And he swallows it because let's say you have no ego whatsoever. The truth is your sustenance. You do not get in the way of what is happening, right? You know, we're all deluded by our own.
There's also no chaos inherent in Popo to be turned into order. It's already all in order. It's almost celestially in order.
It's in a cosmic sense, but to make it human, it's to say that we all have flawed perspectives based on the fact that we have an ego and that we're constantly making the decision of what we're going to pay attention to. And so stark truth is something that we can only integrate so much of because of our identity being in the way. It's something that we're cursed with, right, with self-awareness. But Mr. Popo has achieved emptiness. So the truth to him is something that comes as easily as something that he could just consume. And it actually nourishes him instead of something that he has to contend with because he's fully integrated.
Yeah.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's such an awesome
it's really good
thing for Mr. Popo with him representing
that.
And
it's also the only one that we see who ever eats the Kamehameha wave. Right. We'll see why later on iterations of villains later on will still be affected by the Kamehameha wave, and it's because of the, let's say, potentiality, the amorphousness of inherently in Popo, right? And that ability to absorb the truth inherently because there's no disorder to let's say be subjugated within you. Like Popo's already all in order, and he can just absorb this as I don't know if it's necessarily sustenance, but he eats it like that, right? I don't know if it necessarily sustains him, but it is that which he can consume. Let's
Exactly.
say consume the
And
truth.
then when he sees that, he says, "Oh, I've identified you. I'm going to use this attack that killed Piccolo.
Yes.
I've identified you as a demon
Right. Well,
or a daemon."
which is interesting. It's interesting that Goku thinks that. It's not like Piccolo could do that with the
Right.
Kamehameha Wave.
It didn't affect Piccolo, but it didn't nourish Piccolo.
But the fact that he thinks the Eater of Truth, that sounds like a Lovecraftian horror,
Sure.
right? So I think that's kind of where Goku gets at it, like, oh, this is a demon.
Yeah, and essentially seeing that, I mean, this is a deva or a daemon, right? A demon is, it also comes from that, where you think of an angel and a demon on your shoulder. And so Goku attacks him the same way he attacks sort of the spiritual demon type figure in his world. But the angel is so much higher than the demon because the angel has it. Well, angels float because they take themselves lightly, right?
Right, exactly.
And there's no self for him to try to tackle with this attack.
But let's explain that real quick. So angels float because they take themselves lightly, meaning they've separated themselves from the ego.
Right.
And so they are able to transcend, like Goku hasn't been able to, but they are able to transcend into that heavenly realm because of those ideas. That's why Catholicism has saints, that patterns of being identified in individual spirits are designated to live on and be angels later on in life because they have superseded that ego of being, and they've not all of them. I mean, obviously there's like blemishes in the record, but the
Yeah.
idea of it.
Listen to the interview of Shia LaBeouf telling Bishop Barron how he converted to Catholicism, because it is that, right? A saint whose pattern of being spoke down through the church to him, and he claims saved his life, right?
Yeah.
Just in the pattern of trying to engage himself in the mass. And
I haven't
everything.
seen it.
But it's interesting because that's what that idea, I think, really is supposed to represent, right? With
Well,
an
that's why I
angel.
brought it up, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so Goku's trying to actually wrestle with an angel, and this monkey attack just doesn't land.
Well, and
for
that's kind of the
obvious
final
reasons.
straw. He's like, I'm gonna return to monkey.
Yeah.
And he's like, that. Just go home.
He's like, was that a punch?
just go home at that point, right? But we do see one last thing, and that is that a mysterious figure, we can only assume is Kami, is watching Goku participate in this struggle with Mr. Popo.
Right. And that's just not much to say on that. We see what the shape of his figure is, so it's pretty obvious what we're about to deal with in the next episode.
Yes.
But this is of interest to Kami, right? This isn't a competition to see if your spirit is of interest. It's to show your spirit is of interest. And so this is all a test on that level, because it's sort of one of those act as if God were watching type things. And
Yes.
Goku's getting angry and he's letting his self get in the way. So,
but there are redeeming qualities, as we will see Goku start to try to redeem himself next episode.
Yep.
All right, so I think this was well done. I have no idea how long it is.
Yeah.
Because all of our cuts, but I think we did sufficiently well. We're going to continue this conversation next episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe to our channel. We upload new episodes Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube and Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble. This was episode 124, Temple in the Clouds. I've been your host on the left, Owl.
I've been your host on the right, Brock.
We hope you guys have a good night.